Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Diverse Talk Matters.
To talk about different things around diversity, equity, inclusion, talk about things that people may find challenges with, so we hope you find them really useful. Some are around people's different lived experiences, some really challenging conversation, things that sometimes we don't need to talk about. But we really hope you enjoy the range of topics that we are introducing to you or bringing to you, to your homes, to your house, to your workplaces.
We hope you enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name is Mikayla Sinead, and I'm your host for today. I have two fantastic speakers who you've seen before, you've heard before, and we thought we had such a great time last time. We're gonna run it back and we're gonna remix it, and we're gonna come back again with a new episode. Today we're discussing all things banter. Banter in the workplace. It's one of those words, it's one of those phrases that we've heard plenty of times, but we're going to get into the crux of it. What's good with banter? What's not so good with banter? Are we considering the jokes that we're making to everyone in the workplace? Is it as inclusive as people think it is, or is it just a small thing that people are overly sensitive about? In this episode, we're gonna discuss that. We're gonna unpack that, and yeah, let us know in the comments and all the places and all the socials what you think about banter in the workplace. I know you've heard from them before, but I'm gonna graciously ask for them to introduce themselves again. So we'll start with Paula. So hi, welcome. Let us know a little bit more about you and why this episode's important to you.
Hi, Mikayla. Nice to be back again. My name is Paula Whelan-Cooper. I'm an ED&I consultant working with diverse matters, delivering training, doing some consultancy work. And I love this topic today. It's one of my favorite ones because I think it's the one that's discussed most in training, but also it's the one where people think they know where those lines are, but don't always. So I just love this topic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paula. And Luise, same question. Let us know a little bit more about you and why is this topic important to you?
Hi, my name is Luise Usiskin. I have been working in diversity and inclusion for about 10 years now. Before I did this, I worked in various areas, including child protection, policing, international development, and forest conservation. I think it's really important and interesting to talk about banter. I've worked in workplaces where the banter has definitely not been a good thing. And I've worked in workplaces where the banter has been brilliant and made us all feel part of a family. So I think it's really useful to discuss, as you said, where those lines are and the things we need to be aware of.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to it because it's one of those things, right, where I'm a humorous person. I need to be able to have that comic relief every now and then, right? That's a thing. There is a line between what's humor and what's fun, and when people are included, and when you're making fun of someone or making fun of something, and we all know that feeling that we get was like, oh, the jokes turn a little bit here. But having those lines or having that clarity of like, right, okay, we're actually friendly joking is okay, but then when it crosses this line, it's not. And that can be different for different people because, we all have different humor levels and different kind of acceptability levels. But at the same time, when we're thinking about the workplace, we need to be very, very careful with this. It's not to say that we need a humorless space, but we do need to consider everyone in the jokes that we're making. So I want to start us off with just a prompt that I'll put out for us to consider. How would you, so we're all clear on this in terms of a definition. How would you each define banter in the workplace specifically? And if I can, Luise, I'll come to you first.
So I actually looked it up when we were preparing for this podcast because I thought, how is it defined? And the dictionary and various AIs I looked at define it as light-hearted conversation and jokes not meant to hurt or offend anyone. However, I'd say from my experience of training and seeing and hearing banter in the workplace, I'm not sure it's always that innocent. I think sometimes there is an intention to belittle or put people in their place. And I think banter can be used as an excuse to say things that actually aren't acceptable.
It's the thing, isn't it? Well, that's the definition of banter, yet people may use the label to kind of mask what they're actually doing, right? So in the definition of what banter
Yeah,
actually
that's
is,
it.
that is that lighthearted, all-inclusive, but it's almost like, the phrase,
It's just banter.
it's
it's
only
just
banter.
banter.
It's just banter, like calm down, and like, I'm not racist or like, I'm not sexist, but it feels that kind of reclaiming of reclaiming, just taking over of the term. So that's quite interesting. What about you, Paula? What do you think in terms of how it's defined and how it's what it's turned into?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with Louise. I think certainly the definition I talk about in training is it's the exchange of good-humoured, teasing remarks. And I think one of the key words there is exchange. It suggests the two-way conversation and that both people are happy with that level of conversation. But of course, what it doesn't take account of is all of the people listening in that may not like the exchange of that good humour. And I just thinking about Louise's definition that she read around jokes, I always think with jokes, there's always somebody at the butt end of a joke. So it's always at somebody's expense. And I think it's great to have some light-hearted humour in the workplace. Otherwise, it can be a long day and a dull day. But actually, we all have different senses of humour. So what I might find funny, both of you might not, and vice versa. So inevitably, there's a likelihood in the exchange of humour that somebody is going to find it upsetting, because we all have different lived experiences, different triggers, and so forth. So it's, and I'd agree with Louise, something banter. I hate the term banter, if I'm honest, because it is the word that's used to excuse poor behaviour very often.
I think there's something really important to follow on from what Paula said about that exchange, in that I recognise that quite often in a workplace, people will join in with banter because of the power dynamics there, and they want to be part of the in-group, but maybe they don't find it funny, maybe they do find it hurtful, but they will join in nevertheless. And that can be quite difficult when if you end up with HR or something, they'll say, yeah, but you were joining in, you were part of those jokes. I think it's really important that we consider those power dynamics, and it's not always just structural. It's not always just seniority. It might be part of if you're a member of a majority group or a minority group, there's a power dynamic there. If it's part of your role, there's a power dynamic there. Or if there's just greater numbers of you, that's a power dynamic. So I think that's something really important to consider when we're thinking about that exchange of jokes or that back and forth.
And I think if you're just new to a team or new to an organization, very difficult to put your head up and say, actually, I don't find that funny. You're trying to get to know your new team, the new organization, you're trying to fit in. And that pressure can be huge on people. So oftentimes people won't say they don't find something funny for a whole range of reasons. Doesn't mean that it's not upsetting or offending.
As you said, Paula, when you're new, it can be difficult to challenge things. So I have a really clear memory of my first ever day on police, on team, they call it, on response team. And the first thing you do is you all sit together in a room and there's a briefing, there's a PowerPoint slide about what the important issues, what the things you've got to think about today. So I was sitting there with my new team, 40 people, and we're all sitting there waiting for the briefing to start. And one of the team walked into the room, and he'd been away on an attachment with another department. So he walked in, lovely guy, and someone looked up and said to him, "Oh, God, gay boy's back." And he laughed, and the other guy laughed. And, that was their jokes and their banter. The sergeant in the room didn't say anything, didn't pull anyone up. But for me, sitting there in that room as a lesbian, and that was like literally one of the first things that happened, and that hurt. I felt like, oh, blimey, what have I let myself in for? Like, This is the atmosphere I've come to work in now.
And I think the impact on that, I had a similar situation when I worked in a prison many, many years ago. And one of the first conversations I was overhearing was very negative about gay men and women. And the impact for me was, it was the clear message that if I want to fit in around here, I'm going to have to keep quiet and not come out, because otherwise it's just going to be quite an intense and difficult environment to work in. So it's not just the comment itself, it's the message it gives to people around the organization or around the team.
Yes, absolutely. And the kind of the lack of challenge from above. And the thing was about the team I was in the police, there were, I think, 3 or 4 other lesbians in that team. And it genuinely really wasn't an intentionally homophobic environment at all. But it gave that impression because of the banter and because of the way that was not challenged. And that's important because, it took me a long time to actually learn that actually these people aren't like homophobic in any way, but that's how they sound.
And I think this is going back to what you were saying in terms of the power, the power dynamics at play. And Luise, I'm going back to what you were talking about, Paula, in terms of an exchange. With banter, it needs to be an equal exchange. An exchange can't be a case of someone's going above and beyond. They're giving 100, and the exchange that they're getting back is like a level 10 or something, right? And when you're thinking about power dynamics and you're thinking about all of these other things at play, that needs to be considered with the banter as well. Now, this is the thing when we're talking about in the workplace, and very similar to the last time the three of us spoke, there are certain norms and rules within groups, within friendship groups or within community groups that are accepted. But as soon as they are utilized by groups not within that space, the tone changes. And so that space of, okay, well, if you're in the exchange, if you're in the banter circle, the joke circle, the friendly circle, it makes sense. But there needs to be an awareness, I would say a hyper awareness of who else is in the room witnessing or in commune with you when that's happening, because something that can be very acceptable between friends is very unacceptable for groups outside. And as soon as you open that up in the workplace, you need to be very, very aware. And it's that awareness that's something that needs to be considered here. For me, when we're talking about banter, it was the phrase of my time at university. Now, it took some time after graduating, looking back and thinking, actually, that wasn't okay. That really wasn't okay. Mm-hmm. But it was the rolling thing of like, oh, it's just banter. Oh, I can't be sensitive about it. It's just the way that we are here. But as we've already discussed, we set the culture. We set what's applicable and what's acceptable in spaces or not. And that's a thing that we need to be aware of, because there are going to be groups that are, in my opinion, that are more vulnerable to the negative effects of banter. Right? We spoke about power dynamics. We talked about marginalised groups. But when you're in that group, there's a hyper awareness, and when you're not in that group, you need to practice that muscle. But I'm curious. Do you think that I'm fair in saying that there are certain groups that are more likely to be negatively affected by banter, or do you think that it's a level playing field across the board? Paula, I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
I definitely agree with you. There are some groups of people who will always do that in the workplace when it comes to that banter or humour. I think people, particularly from marginalised groups or who are in a minority. But I guess any of us, depending on our own journey, our own lived experiences, could be more susceptible to some types of banter than others. Unless you've walked in somebody's shoes, you don't know what is going to cause upset or offence. And I experienced a lot where people say in training, well, what if one person in the team is offended? Does it really matter if it's only one person? Or the kind of expression where somebody's just being really oversensitive. And I'm always quick to say, well, actually, if you were that one person that was always feeling on the outside, always on the receiving end of banter that's making you feel uncomfortable or upset, how would that feel? And then in terms of the kind of the question around, well, what about people who are just overly sensitive? My advice always is try and seek to understand their experiences and their journey rather than dismiss how they're feeling. That's always my take on it.
And a take that I completely agree with, seek to understand always. What about you, Louise, in terms of the experiences that you've had, in terms of the training that you've offered, or maybe from your own experience, is there a formula to who gets more of the banter, as it were, that you've seen?
Absolutely. Of course there is. And of course there will be groups for whom that banter feels more harmful. We haven't talked about it in this session. I'm sure lots of people will be familiar with the term microaggressions, the tiny little unintentional, slight, they're little things. They're often unconscious. I think banter, those kind of words and jokes are often examples of microaggressions, but the point about those is that they build up. So they've been likened to mosquito bites. That if you get one mosquito bite, it's a bit itchy and annoying, but you're probably okay. If you get 5 mosquito bites on one day, that's a bad day, but they'll fade. But if you get 5 a day every single day, that really starts to impact on your well-being. And I think microaggressions and banter are the same thing. So if you're getting lots of microaggressions, maybe people dismissing you or not hearing you in meetings or assuming you're in a different role or in a less senior position than you're actually in, and then you are also on the receiving end of these little jokes, that builds up and that gets too much. So I think there's definitely people and groups of people who will be more likely to be on the receiving end of that kind of banter. I also think there's quite a strong tendency, and I don't know if it's cultural or if it's part of kind of British humour, I do think we have a tendency to punch down. So we look for those easy targets. And there's something about kind of white male fragility where if you start to make a joke about that, about, being a white man in a position of power, that's not funny at all for those people. That's suddenly very, very serious. So, yeah, there are absolutely people and groups that are more often on the receiving end of that kind of thing. I think there's a kind of historical and cultural legacy to it. If you look at past TV shows, again, that kind of tendency to punch down to the groups with less power and make them the butt of the jokes. So, yeah, I think that's another really important thing that we need to recognise, is that for some people there's a lot going on over and above that banter that maybe we can't see or hear.
I think that's a really interesting point, Louise. And when I think about some of the banter exchanges that I've witnessed, in the experiences that I've had, it's been this boys' club. So it's been guys usually that are at the same socio-economic level amongst each other. There'll be a bit of banter, a bit of hazing, a bit of what is razzing or whatever. That's the situation, right? They amongst themselves, it's like, oh, we've got these bands, we've got this rapport, and we've got these jokes that are here about. And then it's almost like within them there's jokes about other people, but not necessarily that were spoken to the other person, but it's about the other person. Now, I myself, as a Black woman in these spaces, when I think about these groups, they're very careful around the jokes that they choose around me. Yet there were some other marginalised groups that they weren't as careful with. So when it gets to that level of planning, when it gets to that level of like, so you're aware of what line to cross and what line you won't cross, but in this space, that's when it moves from friendly bands to, oh, this is a power play. This is a power thing that you're doing. Yeah. Who can be a part of the club and make these jokes, and therefore their status in the group is elevated because they have this shared joke. And then who is purposely not allowed and who is purposely going to be the butt of the joke. And I always found it very interesting where the bant lines laid with some of these people,
Yeah.
you know, and they'd make the joke about their power or their money or whatever, but it was safe to do so because, oh, it's me with the same level of power making jokes about that. And so, of course, you're this, that, and the next. But you, Black woman, can't be a part of this joke. We can make it, but you can't. And that isn't a different exclusionary tactic that I've seen with banter as well. Not that it's aimed at me,
Exactly.
but it definitely excludes me from it. And that's an interesting thing I'd love for us to explore as well.
Exactly. And Mikayla, I'm not even that sure that it's always completely conscious that those groups are doing it, but nevertheless, they are subtly putting you in your place. I'm not even sure they're aware that that's what they're doing, but it's happening. That's so interesting what you just said. I'd also say that we're not saying that you've got to have a totally humorless workplace. I think there are jobs, there are professions, there are places where you absolutely need that kind of shared humour. And sometimes it can get very close to the line of tasteless. Certainly when I was in the police service, I know among paramedics, I know among doctors, you see lots of horrible, horrible things every single day, and you will joke about them. But I think you mentioned the phrase hyper-awareness, Mikayla, and I think that's really important, is that hyper-awareness of who's present and what is that joke actually doing? Who are we putting in their place?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, Louise. I've done lots of work with the fire rescue service and often get feedback on training. People say, well, if you go out on a shout and it's quite a difficult one, we use banter to try and debrief, which I always think, yes, absolutely fine. But you have to then have that hyper awareness of who you're and having that level of banter in front of, because you come back in from that shout and there are people who haven't been part of it. What kind of damage does it do to them? They're not letting off the steam or having a debrief. They're then being subjected to probably some very borderline, maybe tasteless humour that is going to have an impact. So I always say really important to have that level of debrief, but do it behind closed doors. I worked for many years with sex offenders and doing the sex offender treatment program. And I would imagine sometimes the level of conversation, if it was heard outside of the room after a session, would be totally unacceptable. But it was that you've just described a part of that debrief contained in the room for those people who have been involved in that.
Yes, and that's exactly the kind of situation, I mean, where we almost need to make light of some of those things, otherwise the reality is just too horrible. But what I think is really important is that being aware of the power dynamics and not punching down and not aiming those jokes at vulnerable, minoritized communities. And that is the line, I think.
Absolutely. And those are that's no longer banter. That's either bullying or harassment.
Exactly. And that's, I don't know if you find this, Paula, but so many times when I'm delivering training related to dignity at work or bullying and harassment, people genuinely don't know the definition of harassment. And they're really unaware that if they make a joke to someone who's fine with it, but someone else overhears it, that is harassment and that counts. And I think that's really vital that people understand that.
And particularly when what might be a joke or humor or banter is unwanted by anybody, it's no longer banter. It's either bullying or harassment and fall under one or two of the categories. So, I find on training that people are very shocked and surprised at what potentially they think is funny could end up in a HR situation.
This is something that needs to be discussed and have that clarification and just like, well, okay, well, it's something like these agreed rules, because here's the thing. There have been occasions where I'd imagine we're having conversations with people in our everyday, whether it's for the workplace or otherwise, and we'll say something that we think is in the realms of what's acceptable in this space, but for the other person, it lands very differently. I'm sure there's been I know that I've been in occasions where it's like, oh, you took it a bit too far there. What we want to make sure is that this podcast series is useful for people. So for the folks who may not be aware of that line, or may not be aware that, oh, I'm offending here, what are the sort of things that people can kind of look out for? And I use the word hyper aware, and I think that there's a level of potentially assumed knowledge and assumes learning in that. So to break that down in a way that what are the specific things to look out for? What are the social cues that we're seeing? What are the social cues that we're not seeing in folks as well? Whether it's going to be in a whether it's virtually, in a hybrid kind of working environment, or if it's, you're in a workspace together alongside each other, like in the same room. There are certain social cues to pick up on. The ways that people will laugh or not laugh, or their reaction to it, and just paying attention to the response that you get from someone, and being aware that not everyone can see or experience things in the way that you can. And so it's like, what am I doing to ensure that I'm considering outside of myself in this? I think this is funny. I can see from my context this is funny. But when you're considering others, what may be at play here? And there's nothing to say that you can't have friendly, jokey relationship with people, but you need to make sure that it feels friendly and jokey for everyone.
Just the term friendly and jokey, and I think we can challenge people in a friendly, jokey way as well, and that helps. You can say like, "Oh, gone a bit far there, mate." It doesn't have to be some massive, serious issue, but we can keep that humour and that kind of good-natured back and forth, and nevertheless we can tell people that actually you've overstepped the mark there, mate.
Yeah. I think one thing we haven't kind of explored is we've talked about maybe telling a joke or saying something funny to somebody else or about somebody else. I encounter quite a lot where people put themselves as the butt end of the comedy, the humour, the joke. So might laugh about themselves maybe having dyslexia, or going through the menopause, talking about, oh, it's just a menopause moment, it's an OCD moment, it's just a dyslexia moment. And people think because they're saying it about themselves that somehow that makes it okay or not so bad. But actually, it's about reading the room and seeing, other people may not be experiencing dyslexia or menopause or whatever it might be in the same way, and may not find the comment or the joke funny. So whether it's about me or about somebody else, it's just paying attention to people's body language, how people receive it, then facial expressions, whether they're I guess we can't assume if everybody laughs that they find it funny. Like you said, there's a nervous laugh. There's the kind of people wanting to fit in. So, it's just an interesting one. There's different layers when it comes to humour and who it's aimed at, whether it's self or other people.
Yeah, I think it was Lenny Henry who did a really interesting interview where he talked about that, about making jokes about being Black, like almost so he could get it in first, but about how looking back now on the kind of jokes he was making made him really uncomfortable. But at the time, that was his way of getting into the in-group, was to kind of own those jokes. So I think that's something it's really important to be aware of. I think the other thing we haven't touched on yet, which I think is valuable, is that we can challenge and we can call out banter and jokes that aren't directed at us, that are directed at someone else, but that nevertheless we find offensive. So if someone made a racist joke, okay, I'm white, but I will find that offensive and I will call them out. In fact, it can't always be the people on the receiving end, because then some people would do almost nothing else. We like a full-time job. It's got to be part of all of our jobs to say when that line's been crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. We all have a responsibility to be an ally in the workplace and call out those behaviours and support people in the workplace, definitely.
No, I completely agree with you there. And I think the best form of allyship is the allyship that I will never see because I'm not in the room, right? That's the absolute best form of allyship, because I know that to know that it's happening even when I'm not watching you do the thing, that's what a true ally is. And so, people are talking about
Absolutely.
wanting to be a good ally and a great ally and all of these things. Do it when I'm not watching. And then I know that you're being true.
And people often talk in training and say, well, I'll read the room, or I know my audience. But actually, when it comes to humour, looking around and trying to second guess and think, oh, I'm on safe ground here, actually much better for people to speak up and speak out when it doesn't touch anybody in the room. As you say, it's that it might be about people who aren't in the room. So yeah.
So I quite often ask the question in training when we're talking about, challenging or calling out, should you do it there and then, or do you pull someone aside and have a quiet word? And loads of people, pull them aside, have a quiet word. But the impact of that, when and where it happens, of no one saying or doing anything, like that experience I talked about when I first joined the police service, I don't know if the sergeant pulled someone aside and had a quiet word later.
Yeah.
All I know is that this unacceptable thing was said and nothing happened. And that has a really big impact. So something then and there, it doesn't have to be a big conversation, like I said. It could just be like, oh, that's not a cool joke, or don't say that. Something little makes a massive difference. It could be a facial expression or a tut. Yeah.
We talk a lot about what happens in the room, but actually, for a lot of people these days, it happens in the virtual room. So a lot of people still working very remotely. And I don't know, Louise, if you've experienced it, but I've certainly experienced where I've opened up a Teams meeting for a training session, waiting for people to join. And in some situations, the level of banter on screen, and it's just unbelievable. And you kind of think, wow, you just joined an ED&I session, and what's the level of comments? It gives
And in the chat,
but actually
people are bolder for some reason if they're typing it.
Yeah. And that's important, because when you think about WhatsApp group chats in the workplace, that's where an awful lot of banter goes on, inappropriate sharing of memes, comments.
That is one of the things that makes my heart sink as a consultant, is when the client starts the conversation with, well, we had this WhatsApp group. Oh no, I know where this is going. One of the helpful things is when you set up those WhatsApp groups is to have a kind of a set of guidelines. Okay, this is a work WhatsApp group and here are the things we'll talk about, or just have a no memes rule or something. But I think a lot of the time, the technology has advanced, but the policies haven't quite kept up.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think that here's the thing: when we're talking about this, the ways the workplaces are built up at the moment, how there are some hybrid, there are some in person, and sometimes people's first introductions to the team is through those Zoom meetings, and they're seeing the behavior via the chats and all of these things, because you don't have as many of the casual conversations that you would have by the copy machine, or by getting a cup of tea or something, and you're able to have those casual conversations with people. And so the character, or the perception of the person that you know is not what you happen to see it past. It's intentional meetings that they're there for, and it's about that impression that you're wanting to leave, or the good impression that you're wanting to leave, and setting the culture of what's acceptable in whenever there's a space where the group come together. And I'm curious about what you think that leaders in that space, and when I say leaders, I don't necessarily mean the leadership team. I don't necessarily mean management. I mean leaders in the subgroups within organizations, in the subgroups of community groups within the or hubs within the workplace. What can they do to enforce that positive workplace and inclusive culture? Yes, we're going to have jokes. We understand that it will help with the a bit of light relief with it. And yes, we want it to be a place where people don't feel as though they need to be stepping on eggshells of everything, or they can't say anything. Like, there needs to be that conversation. And yet we're agreed that there is this point. How do you think that leaders in workplaces can set that tone? Is it by leading by example? Is it about the public calling out? Is it what is it? What can be done? Because there'll be some people listening in and think, well, how do I make sure that we're not going too far in one direction here, or how do I bring it back to a healthier workplace for people in this kind of joking atmosphere? Luise, I'd love to come to you for that first, please.
So there's definitely power in the calling out and the saying, okay, you've gone too far. I think there is also power in thinking about role modeling how you accept feedback yourself. That's the area I most often, I think, see leaders fail in, is they can call things out, but if someone gives them feedback, they're immediately on the defensive and stop listening almost. It's like, but that's really powerful. Even asking for feedback, or if someone tells you something in that public way, thank you for your feedback. Making it really clear that, okay, without feedback, we can't learn and grow and develop. Feedback is a gift, but that's got to come from the top. That's got to be role modeled, that, okay, we will give and we will receive feedback in a way that is helpful and dignified.
Thank you, Luise. Anything that you'd like to add on that, Paula, in terms of leaders in this space?
I think definitely role modeling and leading by example. I think each individual has a responsibility to have a mirror of themselves. I'm in the workplace. What kind of behaviors do people see when I'm behaving? What do they hear when I'm speaking? Because we can't underestimate how we can all influence the people around us. So definitely, we can help set the tone in our environment and in the team by our own behavior. And I love Luise's point about that modeling, calling out behavior is hugely important, but actually modeling receiving feedback, absolutely vital. What the message we're giving is in that positive role model bit is that it's okay to have conversations around here, challenging conversations, and we all learn and grow from them and move on.
There's lots of practical things there that folks can apply in their spaces, and have a think about it, and as I said, interact with us on socials and let us know what you have done and what's been useful, or in a space where you can see Banter's going in a certain direction, or you're considering it. But let us know what sort of tools that you have utilized and what has been useful in your space as well. I think what would be great is if I, to round off this conversation, and as usual, I could stay talking with you both for hours and hours on end, but for the sake of timing with podcasts, I'll ask with the final question. In terms of, as you both are trainers, how can training programs really help employees understand what's acceptable in terms of boundaries? And when we're communicating, and when we're making these jokes, or we're developing healthy banter, what are the sort of training that you either delivered or that you know of, or that you could recommend that would help with developing that muscle of what's a healthy boundary? It would be great to hear from you, Luise, and then Paula will come to you.
So I think dignity at work training is really important, so people understand things like the definition of harassment. I'd say one of the absolute keys to all of this, in fact, is, it sounds so obvious, but recognizing difference. So it's really easy to default to this feeling that, okay, because this is okay for me, that means it should be okay for everyone else. But of course, we know that's not the case. That's based on quite a dangerous assumption, which is everyone is like me, and we know that's not true. I'd also say it's really important that organizations have training relating to things like unconscious bias. And there's a term we use called out-group homogeneity, which is this tendency to see people who are outside of our in-group as similar. And I've seen people get themselves into real trouble saying, oh, yeah, but, I checked with my one black friend or with my one Jewish friend, and they were fine with that. So why aren't you fine with that? And it's that not recognizing difference within those groups that are different from you. I think that's really important. So yeah, my key takeaway: recognize difference.
Absolutely. I think training around dignity at work, hugely important, getting people to think about, reflect a little bit more on what might be considered okay and not okay in the workplace, but helping people to understand that everybody's line when it comes to humour in the workplace is different. So there's a real need for awareness. Of course, covering stuff around bias, both conscious and unconscious, hugely helpful as well. I think it's always great for training where people can sit and discuss these issues and hear different perspectives. That really helps people to move on. So I guess those would be, I think training is hugely important because everybody has a different perspective, and it's really important that the work that the HR and senior managers help to set a tone in the workplace, and training forms part of that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. For me, I would add, it needs to go back to the those social cues that you're picking up from people. Is that comfort levels that you're noticing in the way that folks are exchanging with you and what they're sharing with you. I think it's important that there's the consideration of, just because I may find it funny, or just because like a couple of people find it funny, doesn't mean that therefore makes it so. And so everyone will. There always has to be an air of caution with things, because we're wanting these workplaces to be a healthy space where everyone can thrive, right? And that is not to stifle you in your humor and wanting to bring people together, because I think humor is a fantastic tool that can do that when it's that fair, equal exchange, when you're considering the other power things at play, when you're considering who's laughing because they feel as though they have to laugh because of the position that you hold or what they hold. But also, if your jokes are always at a certain group or at a certain person, you're actually not that funny. So consider your humor tactics.
Yeah, and it's perfectly possible to be funny without punching down, right? It's perfectly possible to be funny without punching down.
Absolutely.
One key thing I would say, Mikayla, also important. I always express the importance of people getting to know each other in the workplace, because the more you connect with those around you, the more you get to understand where people's boundaries are and what causes offence and upset. So I think it's hugely important to get to know people beyond their name and role.
I agree, Paula. I think that taking the time to get to know your colleagues and understanding your colleagues will help you understand, and for yourself, like working out like that fair exchange and that level, right? And here's the thing that will be different for all the folks, but taking the time to get comfortable with each other and to understand that. May even reconsider your jokes as well, right?
It also helps with the giving and receiving feedback. The more you know people, the more comfortable you can be with giving and receiving feedback, I think.
Absolutely. 1,000,000%. 1,000,000%. Folks, I want to thank you for the time today. This was another great episode. I really enjoyed sharing with you and hearing your thoughts and those nuggets that had me consider things differently as well. Before we go, it'd be great for you to share how folks can learn more about what you're doing, how they can connect if they want to follow up with anything. So again, I'll come to Luise, and then Paula. So let us know how folks can get in touch and hear more about the training and maybe work with you in the future.
Oh my goodness, I'd love to say you can find me on Twitter and Instagram and all those things, but I don't do any social media really. So if you want to contact me, get to me through the Diverse Matters website and my email, Luise@diversematters. Is it .co.uk?
.co.uk.
I am on LinkedIn, so you can reach me on LinkedIn, Paula Whelan-Cooper, or as The same with Louise, you can get through to me via my email, paula@diversematters.co.uk, or on the Diverse Matters website.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, team. And until next time, listener, I'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Please do spread the word about our channel and tune in for our next episode.